So we have these dreams until people come in and kind of stomp on those dreams, right? And so growing up, I always knew that I was not your typical Amish girl. Always knew this. I didn't fit in. I didn't do the things. And that's not normal in the Amish culture. And so when I went and hung out with my dad, he's an entrepreneur, had all these businesses, right? That's where I learned businesses. And then I got to see more of the outside world working with customers. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's more to this. If there's other women out here having careers and they're not going to burn in hell, then I'm probably not going to burn in hell if I go to do the same thing.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of How I Made My First Dollar. My name is Netta Dobbins, and I'm your host. And today we have another pretty interesting conversation with our guest, Emily Adams. Emily is a leadership coach, and she has an interesting background that we're going to get into all the details. But before we do that, I want to welcome Emily to the podcast. Hey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Of course, we are happy to have you. So why don't we start with just a general background and then we'll kind of dive into all the things.
So I'll try to keep this high level, but general background is I was born and raised in the Amish culture. I left when I was 17. And for those of you listening, the Amish culture, it's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down. But I was just saying.
We will go down.
In that culture, it's not known for women to have any kind of careers. So from little up, from the time I was born, like you're only there to cook, clean, and have babies. That's your sole purpose. And women are not seen, heard, respected, or shown the value that men are. So that's just kind of a background. Left in the middle of the night, jumped out of a 2-story house and never looked back. And from there, went through a massive culture shock, got pregnant at 17, had my first son at 18. And went through an abusive marriage. From there, graduated from Purdue and worked full time after my marriage, after going through a divorce, and was in the automotive industry for over a decade. And that was the only place that would hire me without a GED, because in the Amish culture, you only go to 6th grade, what's equivalent to a 6th grade education. Mm-hmm. So from there, I got my GED and then went to Purdue and stayed in the automotive industry and worked up into leadership positions, and then realized this is not for me. What? And then went into software for a little bit and then started transformative leadership with my business partner. And that's where I'm at today. So that's really high level.
It's really high level, but you gave us so many, like, how do we get there moments, right? And what you just said is like, realized it wasn't for me. And I think even with the brief overview of your background, there are many moments in there where we can say, oh, didn't realize it was for me. Didn't realize it was for me. So let's step back a little bit and let's dive into some of that. So talk to us more about when you realized, the Amish culture is not for me and I'm going to get out.
Yeah, I would say for that one, how we all have our intuition, and no matter how crazy it is, as children, we tend to play into that dream world of like, what would life look like for us? We have these dreams until people come in and kind of stomp on those dreams, right? And so growing up, I always knew that I was not your typical Amish girl. I always knew this. I didn't fit in. I didn't do the things. And that's not normal in the Amish culture. And so when I went and hung out with my dad, he's an entrepreneur, had all these businesses, right? That's where I learned businesses. And then I got to see more of the outside world working with customers. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's more to this. If there's other women out here having careers and they're not going to burn in hell, then I'm probably not going to burn in hell if I go to do the same thing. Right. So that really kind of opened and expanded me. But then what was the turning point is I lost my best friend in a buggy accident, and she had passed away unexpectedly. And at her funeral, there was something said, and I was like, there's no way that God operates this way. And if so, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to go ahead and burn in hell. If that's what it means, I might as well go live my best life.
Yeah.
And just live it. Right. So that was kind of really the turning point for me to be like, I'm out. And from there, it kind of was a process of, your parents and your family comes in and gaslights you, and then the church comes in and gaslights you, and the culture is very filled with a lot of trauma. And so getting out of that and breaking from that was, yeah, that was a lot of healing work.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit more about just the Amish culture so that we have a full sense of what that means that our listeners do too. Let's back up a little bit more. I know you've talked about, your education stops at the 6th grade and women are seen as homemakers. You don't really have careers. Talk to us a little bit more about, I guess, day to day. What did it look like for you growing up? And you said your friend was killed in a buggy accident, right? So talk to us a little bit more about the day-to-day life.
Yeah, the day-to-day life really, and there's different versions, different levels of Amish. And so I'm just going to go like high level. There's some that have electricity and there's some that do not, and there's some that do not have running water. So
Mhm.
where I was born and raised, we had running water, we had gas, refrigerator, gas stove, but we did not have electricity. So there was no technology. I never had any technology, social media, or any of that growing up. Day to day, you got up and did the chores before you went to school, did the school days, a normal school day, 8 to 3, came home, did the chores again. And then usually you got this little window to play. It's a grind culture, right? So it's work 6 days a week, and then Sundays is you don't work, right? You just don't work. However, the women's work never stops because even on Sundays, you're cooking, you're taking care of like gatherings and church and stuff. That's kind of a day to day. There was a time lived on a dairy farm. So it was like getting up at 4 a.m., milking the cows, showering, going to school, coming back home and doing that same thing because it's twice a day, right?
Right.
And then you get out of school when you're 13 and they go to 8th grade, but it's only equivalent to a 6th grade education. So their school is very different. That's a whole other subject. And their fluent language is also German. So that's primary language in the culture.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. So we are going through our day-to-day things. We're hanging out with our dad because it's like, all right, I'm not doing all this listening, right? So you decide you're gonna leave. And you said you jumped out of a 2-story window in the middle of the night. Take us to that moment when that decision was made and like the process of actually leaving the Amish community.
Yeah, that decision was made, I would say, over a long period of time. I would say probably a good 6 months. And my parents knew that it was coming. They just didn't know how or when. And I had gotten to the point where I was so frustrated with the gaslighting from my family, from my church, that I just completely stopped talking. I wouldn't even talk. I went weeks without talking to my parents. And I had 2 younger brothers at the time in the house, and they were scared I was gonna influence them. So they asked me to go live with my sister and her husband. She also had children. So I was like, okay, cool, whatever. Like, I'll go stay there. And that's kind of where I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna write her a letter and tell her, like, I can no longer do this. And I'm sorry. Like, I'm 17. Don't try to like come convince me. And it was probably the hardest moment. And when I still remember, like, it was like yesterday of like opening the window and be like, okay, we're about to jump. There's no going. And there was like this hesitation. And I was like, okay, what if I jump and I break my leg? Right. And like all these thoughts are going through your head. But I was like, this is where you get to jump and the net just comes out and catches you somehow. And so I always go back to that when I'm trying to take a jump and a leap in my business or in my personal life. It's like, I don't know how this works out, but I know in my body, I feel that this is where I'm called to go. And
Mhm.
I know that I'm going to be the crazy one because, that's me, right? Like I'm the rebel. So taking that jump and just leaving. And there was a time of a lot of grief, right? Because I went through the shunning process with my family and it took a lot, but in that moment, it was just like knowing I either take the jump or I'm gonna get married and have kids and be miserable for the rest of my life.
Mhm. So you essentially took the jump into a new life, right? Because
Correct.
now you're 17 years old and you are out. You're out of Amish culture, but what are you doing? You're not technically legal just yet. So how are you kind of making that new way and making that new life?
So yeah, I had a friend and I stayed with his family and kind of started the it was kind of a culture shift, right? I had to figure out like how do I dress? What do I do with my hair? What is my identity now? And I would say that was probably the hardest thing for me to figure out is like, who am I now? And for the longest time, I would search for like, because I was raised in community, right? Even though it was not a healthy community, but I was like, where's my people at?
Mhm.
And then there was so many things to learn, like educational wise, like, oh, this is how you act. This is what you do. And I would say it took me a good decade to learn that and to shift identity.
Yeah. So, okay, we're out, we're 17 years old, we get pregnant, right? Talk to us
Yes.
about this shift because in your bio you talk about this shift really taking you to leadership coaching in a sense. So give us how we got in this situation.
So in all transparency, there's no sex education in the Amish culture. There's zero. I didn't know. I thought I was dying when I got my period. And getting pregnant, I had no idea how it worked and no idea that it happened. And I thought I had the stomach flu for a couple of days until I had a coworker tell me, you should probably go get a pregnancy test. And I was like, what? No, there's no way. Like, I'm not kidding.
Mhm,
And then realizing, oh, yeah, I'm pregnant.
mhm,
And it was in that moment of like, wow, like now I have another human to take care of.
mhm,
And now, like, things got really serious really quick, right? So fast forward, that led to like getting married. And because in the culture, the Amish culture, if you get pregnant with someone, you also have to get married to them. So that was still my mindset, right? So got married, went through a very abusive marriage, and that really shifted. And I'll be honest, for a while, like that drove me to compete in powerlifting, to get my education, like all these things, because I was in so survival mode of like, you know what? Screw you. I will show you after divorce, like I can survive without you.
mhm,
And so it's very survival mode, but going through school and then building my career, I worked like the hardest person in the room because I was in such survival mode. And then that led me to really in 2019, fast forward 2019, 2020, I had a huge spiritual awakening and realized I accomplished all these things in survival mode. And you don't have to do this in survival mode anymore. You can do it in thriving, but all these skills like resilience, mental strength, reprogramming your brain and your mind, these are skill sets that today I get to help other leaders to teach them that because they didn't have those life experiences like I did.
mhm,
So now when somebody comes to me like, I'm trying to reprogram this, I'm like, oh, I got you. Like, here's how it works. But yeah, I'm a firm believer like your life lessons help you become your greatest skills and your greatest gifts to the world.
yeah. And you have a lot of life lessons, and I loved how you said you worked on reprogramming yourself so that you can reprogram others. And it's actually a great shift because now I want to talk about coaching, right? Leadership coaching. When did you realize that one, leadership coaching is an option, right? Because I feel like coaching seems so foreign to a lot of people until you kind of fall into it, right? So
Mhm.
talk to us about when you discovered this and when you were like, can do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of my career. So in automotive, I was in leadership positions from, out of the 10 years, 8 of those years, I was in leadership positions. And I always was in a leadership position. And I realized that one of the unique things that I always felt as a leader is whoever is working for me, I'm going to train them to take my place.
Mm,
And so I'm going to develop them, share all the skills, all the knowledge I have. And I realized in corporate, that wasn't known because my boss wasn't doing that with me. I had to learn and I didn't have those great mentors in corporate. And
mhm,
then fast forward, I'm all of a sudden helping, some of my friends in leadership positions. They're calling me like, hey, I'm trying to get this raise. How do I get it? And I'm like, well, let's reprogram your mind because you got a bad, money mindset. Let's start there. And
yes.
then we're going to work on your skills to back that up. And a lot of it is everybody has that skills inside of them.
Mhm.
You just have to be able to have someone pull them out of you, right?
Mhm.
And then seeing that and also seeing that I'm really good at business operations. And that's kind of where I was like, me and my business partner were like, we can mix the two, but our leadership development side is not some PowerPoint training or some assessment, but instead taking a mix of spirituality, self-development tools, and some other tools and really getting to the root of it, right? How do you lead yourself on a daily basis? Like we're going to start there before we're going to start about you leading your team effectively.
Right.
And that's when we realized like, wow, this is huge for, anyone that's wanting their career. And then the business owner side, business owners, their minds just like expanded, like, oh, I had no idea I was doing that. So, when we're on calls working through things, I'm very direct and to the point. I'm going to say, hey, are you open to seeing what your gap is in leadership? This is what I'm seeing. And if they say yes, I'm going to give them all that and give them some life work to go with it. Now let's close these gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us about when you decided, okay, I've been in amazing positions in leadership in the automotive industry, but I trust my gut and I trust that I can win if I take the leap and do this. Talk to us about that transition.
That transitioned, man, that took a lot of self-worth and self-value work.
Yeah.
And a lot of remembering and acknowledging who I am and the skills I have. And if you're listening to this, and this is one of the things that you are challenged with, there's this exercise I'll just share real quick that really helped me was to sit down and write every single skill set that I had, not just on the leadership side, not just on the business side, but that I have as a human and put a dollar sign to it. And then ask yourself, why keep you? Right? Because you acknowledge your value, you see the value. And so for me, it was really looking at myself because people would see it in me before I could see it in myself. And to be able to do that work and be like, yeah, I totally got this. And then the more that I showed up, the more that I coach, the more that I teach and see the transformation myself, I'm like, it's a piece of cake, right? And I love it. It lights me up to be able to do it. That's the other factor.
Yeah. So, two things that you said that I want to kind of hone in on. One, if you don't believe in yourself, write out everything that you've accomplished in your personal life and in your career. I do this all the time. It's like writing my autobiography, and things come up that I forgot that I even did until I'm writing it down. And I'm like, oh my God, like I actually am pretty capable of being in these rooms and doing the work that I'm doing, right? Two, you said you already have the skill set inside of you. Sometimes you just need somebody to pull it out. In a previous episode with Brianna Hawkins, which I'll link to in the description, we talked about this. We talked about how if something comes easy, you shouldn't be fearful of that. You should stand in that because that's your God-given talent and that's what's going to make you successful. So I love that. I love that like all these podcast episodes are building onto each other. So I just wanted to just call that out. The next thing I want to talk about in business and you starting a business is pricing, right? Because
Love this.
money is something that I feel like everybody struggles with. And especially you coming from, the Amish culture where you don't have like technology, you're making everything with your hands. And then you say you're operating out of survival mode a lot. How did you get to a point where you're like, okay, I have to, well, one, how did you price it? And two, how did you get to a point where you're like, I have to survive if I'm going to run this business? And that means I can't have this anxiety around money. I have to have a thriving mindset.
Yeah. So money mindset, there's a lot of work it's in. And I will tell you, probably the one that shifted me the most was looking at the stories and the programming from a childhood perspective. So starting there first, that's baseline. So money doesn't grow on trees. A lot of us hear that growing. Well, maybe it does, right? So it's just like looking at those stories and those programming. And then when it comes to pricing, I used to coach for free. Like, because it was so easy for me, I'm like, well, do I really need to charge?
Yeah.
But then I realized that I was doing a disservice to myself because I was not honoring the value that I had. And then all of a sudden, I started being like, okay, it's $50 an hour. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, ooh, $50 an hour? Like, no, I can't do this anymore. Like, it's out of alignment. So, price increase, right? And so I would take myself through the same process that I take clients through now. And that's really tapping into the body, not into the ego, to see where do I feel that my value is on a pricing scale, and listening from your heart and your intuition, not an ego based, because a lot of times our head and our heart are not in alignment. And so in our head, we could be like, oh, I just want to make 100K. But when I tap into the body, into your full worthiness, into your full value that you have as a human, your body may be saying, I want to make 500K. Well, then guess what? Now you get to increase your prices. And as you increase prices, the other thing to look at is what stories are coming up why you can't make the price increase. And so really it's like this discovery phase. And it's also being able to sit in the discomfort of like, this does not feel comfortable, but growth doesn't always feel comfortable. And so being able to sit in the space and hold the capacity in the space for myself to say, we're going to view these things and understand what's coming up with the price increase.
Mhm.
And now when I put packages out there, like, oh, our packages range from 3K to 250K, depending on how you want to work with us, people are like, whoa, like, how did you get there? And I'm like, a lot of mindset work, a lot of body work, and a lot of reprogramming. I just made this post today about like money mindset is not just about the mind, because it's layers also in our body. It's layers and layers and layers. And we just keep discovering it. You can't just do the work one time and be like, I'm good, I'm done, because something is going to pop up. And when a client rejects your price, right? You can't take those personally. You can be like, no, I stand in my value and I stand in worth.
Mhm. Not charging your price is a disservice to yourself. That is a quote. You said that. Um, your mission is to empower leaders. And I want you to just give some advice to some of the small business owners who are listening to this podcast, who may be in the process of growing their own teams. What should they be thinking about when they are honing their own leadership skills?
I would say the biggest thing is to do a self-reflection of you as a person, as a leader first. So looking at what are the areas that you are avoiding to lead into? Are you avoiding the leading in your relationships, leading in fitness, health? Like, I'm a huge believer in mind, body, and soul. Are you avoiding any of those? Because that is going to impact your business. That is going to impact your team. Because when you are avoiding it and it's like a 2 out of a 10, that's your area of opportunity. And then when it comes to leading teams effectively, the biggest thing to learn as a leader is being able to hold a safe, sacred, non-judgmental space. So if you can have that culture and start that with your team, they're going to bring you ideas that may be crazy, but they're also going to bring you ideas that are going to make you millions of dollars, because you've set the foundation of having that safe, sacred space that, okay, thank you for bringing the idea, but we're going to go ahead and table that. However, I love XYZ, and giving them that feedback, right? And pouring life into them and seeing them as humans who also have a desire to be developed. As the leader, that is part of your responsibility, is to develop your team and to continue to pour into them as well. I would say the other thing is a huge one that we see a lot of and coach a lot of on is communication, and how you speak, the words you use, the tone that you use, and then also how you listen. Are you listening to response, or are you listening to actually truly listen? And I will say there's one key thing that I feel like we've implemented in me and my business partner's relationship, and we do it with all of our clients, is when someone is sharing something, we will ask, do you want advice? Or are you just sharing to vent? Or what kind of support do you need? Or if they're just, sharing to vent, cool. That's what it is, right? And there's no unsolicited advice given. Or, framing the question of like, are you open to a different perception, instead of just blurting out your advice that you want to give them?
Yeah.
Because not everyone may be open at this.
Mhm, mhm. This has been like, I am in awe of you. Like, I
Yeah.
am just you're such an interesting person, and when we actually connected via Threads, I've been shouting out Threads in, like, almost every podcast episode. So shout out to Instagram, you're doing something right with the Threads algorithm on that. But we connected, she sent me her bio, and I was like, "No, immediately, need her on the podcast." So, thank you so much for taking out the time to talk with me, to talk to small business owners, people who we may not even know who may be going through some of the same things. Tell our listeners where they can connect with you and potentially work with you.
Yeah, Threads is my space. So on Threads, I'm under Emily Adams underscore. Same thing with on Instagram, Emily Adams underscore. You can also go to our website, transformativeleadershipllc.com. Shoot, I'm always open in the DMs. Shoot me a message, and yeah, I'm always happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. And you all know where to find me. I am at Netta Dobbins everywhere, I think. I'm everywhere these days. But that is all for today's episode. Keep listening for more, and we will see you soon. Happy marketing.